We'll hit record there.
Sean, can you turn your volume down?
I can turn you down, like your headphones.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
I can't turn me down.
No, I know. No, that's what I meant.
Right.
You can't ever turn this down, my man.
I get it. Turn the Sean voice in my head.
You'll never get it.
Good luck. People have been trying for years, my friend. What Good luck with that. Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, we're hot. Mics be hot. Mics are red.
This is going to be serious. Punya has got a pen and a pad in front of him.
No, that's because I got a doodle.
Yeah. If you
that's how I stay focused. Yeah. No.
If you haven't had the luxury of being in countless meetings with Punya, there's like his journal is just filled with doodles.
And I call them visual notes.
Visual notes.
And I can never make any sense of them anyway.
Right. But who can make sense of their notes anyway?
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Yeah. No. Yeah. Well, I'd say we should just crack this thing going and just rock and roll.
That sounds good to me.
Initializing waveform.
Modulating signals for transmission.
Exploring the possible, probable, and preferable futures.
Welcome to Modem Futura. All right. Well, welcome to Modem Futura, the show that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like what will it mean to be human in the future? I'm Sean Leahy, joined with my co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And we are joined today by a very special guest, Punya Mishra. So Punya, I'm going to embarrass you by reading your bio.
I have
to.
Punya, who is going to tell us all about being human.
This
is why you're here.
That's right.
The human in the room.
So for the 15 people out there who don't know who Punya is, Punya. So I lifted this off of your website this morning. So if it's wrong,
better versions,
it's on you.
Funnier versions on there which you could have picked.
I should. Well. Yeah, this one's not funny. Well, I'll put a funny one in the show notes. How about that? So Punya, you are currently serving as the Director of Innovation Learning Futures at the Learning Engineering Institute and professor in the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University, also with an affiliate appointment in the design school. So welcome. And if you're not familiar with Punya's work, again, I'll link his bio in the show notes so you can see it. But real briefly, internationally recognized for his work around educational technology, TPAC.
Yeah,
you can't escape that.
I know. It's like you're known for creating a Venn diagram. It's sort of deeply embarrassing fact, but that's okay.
You could never escape it.
So the big question was this a doodle? Did it start off as a doodle?
Actually, no. That's one where,
Didn't start.
It did evolve over time, so that's kind of interesting.
Yes. And of course, I would be remiss too if I didn't mention, obviously, of course, then the role of creativity and aesthetics in learning, as well as the application of collaborative, design-based approaches to educational innovation. So I think that'll be also, very germane to our conversation, broad topic in traditional Modem Futura style. I brought one note,
right?
AI and education, and then we'll see where this this magic takes us.
But I have a question.
Yeah.
Where did the name of this show come from?
Okay, this is the next 30 minutes.
No.
Well, thank you for spending all of your time listening today, Punya. No, so Modem Futura. There was a ASU news bulletin, and they did a little blurb on our show, which, again, thank you very much for that. But it was the most fun explaining like where Modem Futura comes from. So modem literally is, I believe you can classify it as a portmanteau. So it's two words pushed together. It's modulate and demodulate. And then futura is Latin for futures. And it was, so this idea, because of course, so many podcasts when we were originally kind of coming up with a name, everything futures was already, including our podcast, Learning Futures. It was already there.
No, so because I kept thinking modem as in like the good old modem with the beep, 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 beep.
Yes, but it is.
So, so I was like,
yes.
Yes, and so the future is downloading.
Slowly.
The future is not only is it downloading, but see, that's the whole beauty of the modem is you are taking different kinds of signals and translating them to make sense, which is what we do with futures. We look at trends, signals, and drivers and try to make sense of all that crazy that crazy stuff to try to figure out what in the world will it mean to be human in this technologically transformed future.
For sure.
So thank you for asking.
So it's a name that will really resonate with somebody who was around in the late 1990s.
Right. So you're tapping that age group demographic.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Yes.
If you knew what your modem was in baud, this show is for you. But also, so here's an Easter egg. If people haven't picked it up, in our the little intro chime that we play, there is the actual it's the actual squawk, it's the actual communication handshake, as it's called, from a 56K modem that's in there. So if you listen carefully, you can actually hear that. That is a real, and I think that one's from a Broadcom.
It's getting really nerdy.
All right, I'll stop. I'll pull up from there before we lose everybody on the.
Punya, why did you have to ask?
No, because
I've been waiting for somebody to ask
about that. And I listened to a few episodes, hoping at some point it would come up.
So there we are. Yes,
so I was like, I'm going to be on the show at some point, and so I have to ask this.
And Andrew, as a callback to the last episode we recorded, it's my own mystery box. Like, what is in there?
Yes,
right?
Sure.
No, thank you, Punya. I've been waiting for. We've done 30 some episodes. And,
seriously, and nobody's asked this.
Well, we only. I can't remember how many we've had guests on. Probably.
No, I get it. No,
10 of those.
Anyway,
maybe,
so thank you for that. Yes.
Yeah. It's an absolute pleasure to have you here. We've been trying to get you on for a long time because we always do this. I'm like, with the three of us, we always just, when we find each other in some other space or in place, it's just the lights kick off and it's just a lot of fun. So I'm thrilled that you're able to join us today, Punya.
Cool.
In our cozy
glad to be here.
Our cozy little podcast studio. So I thought, I'll just throw it on the table. AI in education solved, right? We're done.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're done.
In fact, just this morning, I was listening to the latest Ezra Klein show, and that's all about AI in education, and I got bored.
Yeah.
Which is rare with Ezra Klein, because I almost started thinking of like, come on, call these guests instead.
Oh, yes.
Well, that's one listener that we've lost now, isn't it?
There you go. No, maybe it'll force him to make him listen, right?
That's right. I'm sure he listens to the future.
This is the funny thing about any medium that comes along, like any new medium that comes along, as radio, television, so on and so forth. Like, it's going to transform education as we know it, And, so with AI as well. And in fact, somebody's done this little chart of how many times Bill Gates has talked about a particular thing as now going to transform education and deliver personalized learning. And so, of course, the big thing around AI is this whole idea of personalized learning and so on. The challenge, of course, is like, I think it misunderstands what education is, what learning is. Why are we at this university? Why are we sitting around this table and not doing this over Zoom? Why is there so much more engagement? There is this social aspect.
Sure, the in-person stuff, yes.
The in-person, the sort of the connection, the relationships that the educators and students develop. One of the big things I think, faculty or teachers do is model for the student what it means to have a life of the mind in a given discipline, right?
Yes,
and to imagine that there would be some kind of a chatbot or something which could do that seems just really hard for me, unless it's completely faking it, right? It's making up this garbage about like, once when I was a child,
I hate to disillusion you. I hate to disillusion you. This is what AI has been doing for the last 2 years.
Exactly.
Faking it.
It's been completely faking it, right?
But very well.
Well, depends, right? We can dig into that. So I think the way I look at it, I see this as a really powerful technology. And, Andrew, I love some of the experiments and play that you do with it. Same for me. I love playing with it. But as this transformational technology about education, I think misses the point about sort of the infrastructure, the system within which education functions. Yeah. And there are reasons for that. Some right, some wrong, some historical legacy and so on. But just that this thing will come in and transform education or what happens in quote unquote classrooms or learning spaces just seems a bridge too far. And there's another aspect to it, which is the long-term aspect to it, which I would love for us to get into a little more. But to me, it is a really powerful tool for brainstorming, for trying out different things, for playing with it, to give us ideas for how we can do something new or different.
So I want to dig into this a little bit, because I think this is both a controversial perspective, but a really important one. And it feels like we have to go back to not only what the purpose of learning is, but how we actually learn. And it seems that there's a danger that if we forget about the whole nature of learning, we just think we can plug in a new technology and transform it without understanding the essence of what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. I mean, there are quotes galore, right? I mean, Edison had this quote about like the film projector will change education as we know it.
Right.
I remember like I actually have a book with me, which is like about how film is going to transform education, right?
Yes. And I'm sure if we're around with sort of Plato and Socrates, they'll say sort of
print
yes.
might, print might have a legacy.
Writing things down. Writing things down was going to destroy the faculties of our memory.
And the thing is, what I love about that Plato Phaedrus quote is actually it is true. There are certain aspects of what it meant to live in an oral culture that were transformed by being written down.
Yes.
I mean, we are all sitting here in a university. What's the currency for an academic is citations.
Yes.
What does citation mean? It means that you can go to an actual artifact, look at page number X, and there is your information.
Right. Yes.
That is a legacy of print.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so I don't want to minimize the power of a technology or a medium to transform how we interact, how we acquire knowledge, how we share knowledge, and so on. The more interesting question to me with media and so on is that whether or not Edison was right about film transforming education, film transformed the world within which education exists.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yes. Yep.
Right? And so if you look at the rise, if you look at film and radio in particular, right? The anti-colonial movements that you start seeing appearing across the world gain power from those media.
Interesting. Yes.
Right?
Yes.
As does fascism.
Yes.
Right? There's a reason why those things
so it cuts both ways.
It cuts both ways.
Yep.
And that's what I think when I look at social media. So I was just thinking, I was doing this thought experiment the other day. Imagine if I'd have never had any social media account or some educator. I never did it. I never joined Facebook, Twitter, whatever, Instagram, Snapchat, whatever. At some level, it wouldn't matter because I would still be living in a world
You're right. Yes.
that has been transformed by social media.
Yes. Yep.
And so to me, the bigger question about AI and education is how is the world being transformed?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then that's going to impact the classroom.
Oh,
that's
yeah,
going to
absolutely.
impact not just the classroom, but any spaces where we learn because it's going to change us, our engagement with each other, our social and political and economic structures. So all of those ripple effects.
Yep.
That's what I think is a more interesting question.
Very interesting.
Honestly.
So just as an aside to that, I want to come back to this because I know you've written about this sort of whole framing, but just on personalized education. So there has been a long time this dream, I think not necessarily from educators, but from people outside thinking, what if everybody has their own personal tutor in their pockets and they can learn everything they need from their smartphone or whatever? Is there a place for that sort of thinking or is that just delusional?
I think if you think about it, that it's going to replace all education, I think it's delusional.
Yep.
No two ways about that, right? But that has been a dream for the longest time. And there are aspects to the dream which are also kind of darker because those have to do with surveillance. Like, how do I know enough about you to guide you in a certain way? So
that's right.
The flip side of personalization is surveillance.
Yep.
Because if I don't know about
information,
exactly, if I don't know enough about you, I can't really then meet you where you are.
That's that whole to kind of throw that in there. That was sort of like that holy grail of true personalized learning is that an AI system would know, again, we'll pick on the teabag model, but it would have all the content, it would have all the pedagogical models possible, and then it would know everything about you. It would know everything about Punya. It would know your emotional states. It would know what you've learned, what you haven't, how you best learn, when you best learn. I mean, literally the datification of you and then go, well, now I can feed you what you need to know when you need to know it.
And see, that's where it's interesting because we sort of...
But to do that.
Because we gloss over like, it'll know everything about you.
Yeah.
What does everything mean? How you best learn? It depends. If it's basketball, versus playing the violin versus solving math equations. I mean, what is best for... so we take these things for sort of automatic for granted. And I think that's sort of an issue. Yeah. But coming to this personalization, there's some really interesting things I think that we need to be thinking about. And the way I've sort of tried to describe it, imagine like you have like 4 quadrants, like you have an X and Y. And so let's say along the X axis, you have knowledge, expertise of a domain.
Yes.
And Y axis, you have expertise on AI, at least the current state of AI, how it works, these large language models and so on and so forth. So the person who's sitting in the top right corner, who has high expertise in a domain and high expertise in AI.
Yes.
they are actually getting really better at what they're doing.
Yeah.
Right.
Selling.
Yes. They're leveraging it. Yes.
They're leveraging. However, it is also coming at a much greater cognitive effort than they had thought.
Interesting.
So the
Sure.
research and expertise shows that the more expert you get at something, the more automatic things become. What we are seeing, at least the data is showing, is that if you sit in that upper right quadrant, your cognitive effort has gone up.
Okay.
Because AI is taking you in all these different directions, and you have to
Yes.
keep
You're spinning
corralling.
even faster.
Yes.
You have to work really hard. Now think of our learner who's sitting in the bottom left quadrant.
Yeah.
They neither have expertise in the domain, nor do they understand the ramifications of AI.
technologies.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
They tend to trust AI output a lot
Explicitly.
more than anybody else,
Yep.
but they don't have the judgment
Yep.
to determine whether AI is
So they're just a
shading-
sponge,
Yeah.
sort of absorbing everything that they get.
Well, and that's,
Yes,
and that kind of gets back to, and I forget which episode it was. We were having a conversation around, again, which we often do when we talk about any of these emerging technologies, is what's gained and what's lost. And that is one of those components. I think it was when we were talking about like this, one of the super levels of ChatGPT, is that if and when perhaps people become so reliant on it in that upper quadrant, and that as that sort of trickles its way down through that quadrant, right? That people know, they not only do they not know how to judge the tool, they also have lost the, I'll say, traditional skills of how to evaluate whether the accuracy, the authenticity, of this information that's coming out. So then it becomes this almost this nightmare, if you will, self-fulfilling prophecy that you use this tool that you trust, but you've lost the skill to learn how to even test it.
So this is what's really interesting is, right, we often talk about these things, hallucination and make-up facts.
Yeah.
That actually is not as big a worry for me than it is the friction that is required to actually genuinely learn something.
Yeah.
Right.
The effort that goes into it, if we lose that, that's the biggest fear.
Yeah, and let's.
right?
I think we should pick on that for a bit, because I think that's something that I would say that we as educators in this room and collectively don't do enough about talking about that friction.
Yep.
There was for example, I used to use this all the time when people say this is hard, and it's like that moment where it no longer is automatic, and you hit that. I don't know. This is frustrating. That is that friction of going from you don't know how to do something, from acquiring the new knowledge, the new skill to be able to do that. And then that lowers the friction, then you move on, and then you find more friction.
Right. Exactly.
But it is that friction that so often we are trying to circumvent. Right? Because it's hard. Like
It's
friction,
hard. Learning is hard.
Friction of any sort. Friction, just the definition of it is it stops things from moving.
You have to push against it.
You have to push against it.
And I think
or find ways to lower it. Lower the friction coefficient and things move. But I think one of the challenges we're seeing, because right now, Andrew and I were just chatting this morning early, because I've been just bombarded by this one magazine article that's making their head round.
The cheating one?
Everyone's cheating, and and I'm like, yeah, of course, cheaters are going to cheat and all this kind of stuff. But ultimately, again, one of the things for me that's like the alarm out of that is not whether or not people are using an AI tool to cheat, because that's like, oh, whatever. It's that, again, from a more of a societal perspective, what happens when we're trying to eliminate that friction, which is what you were just saying, Punya, which is that is the danger of where you throw your hands up and you said, I'm no longer interested in learning, period.
Yes.
Right.
I just want to float.
Want to get to the end point.
To the end point. And, there's this, I don't remember the name of the book precisely, but it is sort of the unnatural nature of science. Like if science was easy, we would have, why do people still have a misconception that heavier objects fall faster than, lighter objects? We still have that, right?
Yes.
Despite years and years of, like Galileo possibly dropping stuff from the Leaning Tower.
I'll put it in a vacuum, in a feather, in a marble fall at the exact same rate.
So science is hard.
Right.
Figuring easy answers are easy to come by. And that's why you see a lot of sort of misconceptions about vaccines and so on and so forth, right? Those are easy answers. Things are complicated. And, then combine that with the design of these LMS, these large language model systems, which is like sycophantic in the extreme, which means they'll always agree with you. Now, you don't have a judgment. You trust the AI because you don't understand AI very well.
Sure.
Right.
You have no expertise in the domain, so you're going to trust it. And so invariably what you'll end up happening is this sort of conversational drift where you will move further and further away from,
because it's making it easy.
It's making it easy.
Yes.
And And if you think about, in fact, I wrote this paper back in, I think, 2005 or 6. I presented this where, like, if we really get into this agentic technologies for teaching and learning, they will have to have different personalities. A coach is a different personality than a teacher is than a drill master.
But from everything you're saying, so you can absolutely see the danger there, that AI just sort of takes the friction, the hardship out of learning so we don't learn. But also you can imagine that it could be changed. We could have AI-based systems that actually build that friction in.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not saying it. I think it's a design challenge.
Yes.
The thing is that this is where I think the interpersonal thing comes in, right? That we would be much more. So there's a lot of research. In fact, I did some research on praise versus blame. So the human research on this shows that if, let's say, you fail at some task and the teacher says, I thought you could do that. So you are blamed for failing. It actually motivates the students more. If you are given praise for success on an easy task, that's actually demotivating.
Right.
Yep.
I had a professor who I would just work something overnight and show it next morning. And Sean is smiling because he knows who this person is. And they would say, oh my God, Punya, you are the smartest And I would like, either you have an axe to grind, you need something from me, or you think I'm really stupid.
Right. Yeah, that's the best part of that is like, your opinion of me is so low.
I just whipped something out because I needed to meet you this
We both know this is.
But when I did the same study with human-computer interaction, what we find is that it will always value the praise and never the blame. So that's where the distinction between how we respond to humans and how we respond to technologies can come in. And if a teacher is going to be one who's going to motivate you that when you don't solve that math problem, they say, oh, I thought you could do that. A computer saying that, your response might be very different.
Oh, you're so great. Thank you.
I suspect that there's a sort of a breadth of understanding here. So I'm thinking immediately when you say that. So that resonates with me. And I can see it resonating with self-motivated people where they are striving internally to be better. But I can also imagine those students who are really struggling. And they're at that fragile point that if you're not careful, you demotivate them. So there's got to be some nuance.
And that's where I think that's where good educators come in.
Right.
They know when to recognize.
Right, exactly.
You know, I mean, there are some beautiful moments if you look at some videos of teachers teaching where a student gives a wrong answer. The teacher doesn't say it's wrong. They say it's interesting. Right?
And it's a very British term, by the way, when you say interesting.
But what it is doing is pushing and then asking the student, how did you get there?
That's it, yes.
And then you start breaking apart the process. That feels like the
coach. Yes, that feels like the coach.
Exactly. Yes. And so, I mean, do I think that there is a role for AI in education? Absolutely. Like, you're not saying that. It's cutting through the hype and cutting through the thing that, oh, this is going to be the ultimate educator, ultimate teacher. Every child will have Einstein in their pocket or something like that. That's the hype that I sort of push against.
And that feels like going backwards. So you remember through all the years of pedagogical learning and thinking about this, people have said we have to get away from rote learning. Learning is not about learning facts. It's about learning how to think. And yet it feels like we're slipping back into just thinking learning is about facts.
I'm not exactly sure that the people who are proposing or proponents of these chatbot based educators, personalized learning, are necessarily saying just facts.
But I think it's learning stuff. It's being told stuff. And the assumption that if you're told something, you somehow learn it.
You learn it. Or if you practice it, I mean, so you do a math problem, it'll tell you it's right or wrong and so on. So it's like the SATs, like where the problem gets harder as you get it right. I'm not sure that model works because people don't. Certain skills, develop that way, but not all learning is that way. That's, I think, the point.
No, I would absolutely agree. And again, going back to your science example, so sort of being a scientist, my learning process was learning how to think differently, learning how to develop a different type of intuition. And you do that through trial and error, through practice, through failing, through picking yourself up, and eventually you begin to see the world in a different way. But it gets back to this friction idea. There is a process you have to go through.
And I think the critical piece in that is reflection.
Yes.
You know, you can have tons of experiences in life. You'll have learned nothing from them unless you step back and reflect on it. And I think a big part of becoming a scientist, becoming a writer, becoming whatever, good at whatever you do. And that's where coaches come in, is they teach you how to look at your performance. You know, and learn from that. You know, and I think that's such a critical piece. Again, what role does AI have in that?
Yes.
Like, will I believe it when it asks me to reflect? Will I care?
Well, and you might get a kick out of this, but like it was something I've brought up before is, again, going back to John Dewey, right? With this idea that the learner isn't this vessel that needs to be just told information. There's all these illustrations. If you imagine like a cartoon with like someone's head opened, right? And it's this like
bucket.
Yeah, and just literally pouring the bucket of knowledge and facts into their head. But really that it's about the inquiry, communication, expression, and construction. And the role, and this is where I get really excited about the future potentials of where we're headed with artificial intelligence, is leveraging those tools, knowing how to appropriately leverage those tools by an expert, a guide, to foster those natural impulses of essentially learning, so that we're leveraging these things, not replacing just this method of you are a vessel to be filled with my knowledge, whether that's Sean's knowledge or my ChatGPT's knowledge or whatever, right? But it is about how do those tools and how does the knowledge contained within these systems, right? Which is phenomenal. The fact that it has all of our human written history and then some contained in these, LLMs.
It's not just the knowledge. And I think it's important to recognize here, it's the way that it actually delivers it.
Especially the deep reasoning parts and things too.
Which is very, very human. So we absolutely have systems that are emulating how humans sort of interpret information and communicate it, which, again, going back to that idea of a two-edged sword, is worrisome because now you've got a system which is incredibly persuasive. I mean, the beauty of a good educator is you have that bond of trust and respect, which is persuasive.
Right.
And now we're beginning to see that emulated with machines, which can go both ways.
Yeah. So one of the things that I was struggling with when I was looking at like the learner quadrant, right?
Yes.
And the answer when it hit me was like, this is so obvious. Because if the care is about that friction is going away, I think that the answer that I wrote about in my blog was that it comes back to caring.
Okay.
That if you care for something, you will want to get it right, not get the approval of the invested in it.
Yes.
And that's what's going to help you move from this bottom left quadrant to the top right quadrant.
Yes.
Something we as educators have always known at some level. And the Dewey thing is a good thing of that. These are the impulses that drive us.
Yes.
We want to understand, we want to build, we want to communicate, and we want to express ourselves. And if you tap into that and through something that you care about, then I think you have that positive spiral that you can get.
Yeah. So then where does this care come in? And I think this goes in part back to your description of an educator that understands their students, understands sort of where that care is and where their care is to them and how to motivate that. How does that then equate to AI? Can AI care, or is this now part of a system where humans sort of bring that into the equation?
I think it has to come from the humans because I think the AI is going to fake it. Right?
Well, I mean, sure.
So
good though.
I disagree.
It tells me I'm so handsome.
ChatGPT really cares for me.
I know.
I'm the handsomest Sean it's ever met, and it likes to tell me so.
Sean, I've seen the video. I know that's not true.
Oh my God. We have I will share that through YouTube at some point. We have videos that exactly explain exactly the opposite of that. But Punya, I have a question. If you could maybe talk a little bit about sort of how you've been doing this for a long time in your career, is thinking about the role of a teacher or just an educator as a designer, and how that because I'm sort of putting these pieces together about how do we work with that care and that intentionality. And I think there could be a lot said about, again, as we move the arrow of time down and this world around us becomes continuously evolved with AI. Again, the knowledge is there. It's in our pockets. And as you had said before, you mentioned, it's not about having an Einstein in your pocket, but we have that in some ways. We have that. But still, it's about designing the experience, designing we'll use the loaded term that you and I use a lot, performance of understanding, that might be drastically different 10, 15 years from now than the things we've seen traditionally up until today. Yes. But what is the role of the teacher playing as like a designer? Designing the experiences.
Before I come to that, I want to emphasize one thing that I think that is getting lost in a lot of the AI conversation, which is AI, because it's text and images, it's a certain kind of knowing.
Yes.
that is being emphasized.
Yes.
There is a physicality to knowing. There is a kinesthetic aspect of
The
knowing.
embodiment of it.
There's an embodiment of knowing. There is a thing of being in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
So what we have done is we have taken a certain kind of knowing and said that's all learning.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be extremely careful about that.
I agree.
Which is why Dewey's thing of construction.
Yeah.
AI allows you to construct just a certain kinds. It allows you to construct a poem, maybe, but not a physical artifact, not a thing. So that's why the creativity class that I taught, we actually explicitly talked about Dewey's 4 impulses.
Oh, good.
And we said, like, okay, inquiry. We have been engaged in inquiry, finding out what these tools can do, cannot do, building bots, so on. Expression, because each of you brought your whole selves into that act. So all your bots are going to be very different from each other's because it's your bot as opposed to some other person's, right? Then the whole idea of construction, that we are building something, right?
Yeah.
So all of those things get embodied in that final event that we create.
Yes.
And now it doesn't matter if you used AI for the entire thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yep.
Because you now bring that caring because you want it to go. So all of those things come together.
Yes.
So that's what becomes a powerful educational
That
thing.
is only possible if you have this fundamental understanding of learning and pedagogy and the process. If you don't have that, if you just think that learning is acquiring knowledge and facts, you lose all of that.
I mean, I'm from India, right? So if you look at India, like Hindus in particular, like I'm born Hindu. So the abstract knowledge, the Brahminical knowledge was valued very, very heavily. That was the real knowledge, the abstract knowledge of the Vedas and so on. Physical labor is completely demeaned in India. It is not valued at all. It is not seen as being intellectual. And we are sort of seeing the same thing happen with ChatGPT.
Yes.
Interesting.
Yep.
Which is the roles of like the physical aspect of building stuff, of constructing things, somehow don't exist in that space. People need to learn that? Can you learn that just by chatting with ChatGPT how to build a table? I don't
I'll tell you how to
so.
fix your bathroom sink or something, but do you actually know how to do it?
But even, and I think you were sort of really strongly hinting at that. So we started off talking about the pad in front of you and doodling.
Yeah.
It's a physical activity.
Exactly.
And from what you're saying, that is something that is integral to how you think, how you understand the world. You cannot divorce the two.
Einstein and his experiment that he used to do in his head. What does it mean to sit on a wave of light?
Yeah.
Right? Tesla could imagine in his head an entire working machine.
Yes. Yep.
And then go ahead and build it. I mean, those are ways of thinking and doing and being in the world that I see completely not even undervalued. They don't even get a mention.
I know. Yes. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Again, you're talking to me as a physicist who learned by doing.
Exactly.
The only way that I develop my physics intuition is by doing stuff and failing and succeeding with my hands.
Exactly.
Well, it's interesting. As you were talking, this reminded me of something I had just read somewhat recently. I was just looking up to make sure I got the country right. Sweden, I don't know if you guys came across this article either, but Sweden has apparently made drastic changes and a shift away from relying heavily on digital learning. Noticing that they did a longitudinal study from, I think it was just under 10 years. I think it was from 2016 to 2024. And they've seen this massive drop in literacy capabilities. And so they're really now pushing, and they're not, maybe it's just correlation, whatever, but they're really pushing. They're like going back to physical handwriting, physical books.
I mean, even machines.
Yeah.
ChatGPT can't help you visualize a machine in that sense, right?
Yeah.
And that can only come over actually working with machine, understanding how things push and pull. And
now, of course, when we've got actually physical robots with ChatGPT inside them, maybe things will be different.
Maybe. Well, but I want to come back.
At present, they don't know where a mouth goes on a Muppet character.
Yeah.
You got to get over that hurdle first.
Again, there is this. Anyway, so coming back to the teacher as designer.
Yes.
And so the idea of the teacher as designer is that they are orchestrating an experience.
Yes.
That's what good teachers do. And there's this great quote from Dewey that, that nobody questions the fact that all learning comes from experience, but not all experiences are equally educative.
Right.
And I think that's where good educators come in.
Yes.
They are bringing in text and you're reading and you're writing and you're building and, all of those things are happening sort of in conjunction, knowing that in the 25 people in that classroom with you are going to be at very different spaces, are going to grow and develop in very different ways to be sensitive to that, right? And AI will play a role in that, just like a textbook plays a role.
Right.
Sure.
But
Yes.
to say, I mean, this is what I used to find really funny when this MOOCs thing happened.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone was like, oh my God, MOOCs.
And so, well, the university was over back then.
Yeah.
It was the
And
end.
I'm like,
it was the end. 20 years ago.
How is this different from a library?
Yeah.
Right.
Like, how many
Yeah,
people have become
right.
physicists by going to the public library?
Right,
Maybe
right.
one
Yeah,
in a
the
million.
books are still there. Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so access to this is, I think, the fundamental thing that we absolutely need to recognize.
So-
Access to information doesn't equate to learning.
So then let me ask you about that. And I agree with all of this. And yet we're sitting here in a university that fundamentally believes in the importance of the scalability of learning. And this is obviously something that ASU is known about. So how do you scale? Or is even this an illusion that we can scale learning?
Yeah, this is me. Look,
Yeah.
There's this fundamental tension, I think, within
Right.
me
Yes.
about this, right? I
Yeah.
recognize, the value of that scaling, right?
Mhm.
If we have the challenges that we face in the world, the lack of good educational opportunities.
But we need more learning. We need learning at scale, not just access to knowledge.
Exactly.
At scale.
Access to
Yes.
knowledge
Yes.
doesn't help.
Yes.
The way I would like to imagine scaling would be sort of what's the right analogy for? We like lay 1,000 flowers bloom kind of
Mhm.
thing, right? Which is that we are not saying the same model is going to apply in
For
this
everybody.
community
Right. Yes.
for everybody,
Yep. Yep.
but that depending on what your needs are. And I think ASU does actually a pretty good job of that, in the sense of, if you look at ASU Prep Digital, the kinds of support they offer
Yeah,
is
sure.
very different from what they offer to an undergraduate,
Right.
where what they offer to a master's, depending on the circumstance, if they're first gen, college going versus others, recognizing that
Mhm.
and then customizing to that. I think that to me is the
Right,
viable
right.
way forward. It's not a one model fits
Sure,
all.
which makes
That's-
perfect sense.
yeah,
Yes.
Which
Yep.
is where I sort of struggle with the scaling bit.
Yeah.
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 You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious too, just around, I think, a lot of the things we've been talking about, I think might fall into this category, but some of these, in some ways, a provocative theme around the future of education and I really like the way that you framed it, that it's less about AI and education and more about education in the era of society living amongst the changes of AI, right?
Sure.
But again, think of if knowledge is free in the sense, like, what we can package in these devices, or a type of knowledge, that really what we're kind of talking about, and feel free to argue and disagree with this, is that we're moving away from this idea of knowing to an idea of becoming. That we're using that is less important is this core, the facts, the figures, things like that, but really about growing your identity in terms of what that means as a learner and follow that train down
Sure.
a professional, right? Or whatever that will mean too. Because again, we haven't mentioned this piece before yet on this show today. When we think of education, a lot of times, for a lot of people, they think about it as this period of time, right, that exists between early childhood and my job.
Yeah, right.
And so
It's not.
no one ever told me. Checks watch and calendar. I've been in this for too many years. But so there's this interesting piece that I think, and again, as the whole of society continues to change and evolve over time with new technological innovations and disruptions and things like that, the role of how that time period of education is perceived and what its function is, where you can take a very sort of reductionist look at it and say, well, it's to prepare you to be a fully functional civic person in society with contributing to the economy, basically making money so you can pay taxes, and the wheel just keeps on going and going. But if we look at that same sort of innovation and disruption in the societal level, if that end part, so if you look at this timeline, right, of you're born, there's this big education bit in the middle, and then there's the professional bit at the end, and then there's retirement, and then your gravestone. But if the part of that professional, that motivation of getting an education specifically with the aim of economic value, if that changes or goes away, then there's this interesting space where it calls into question, well, then how would education change if there's no, for example, economic incentive to learning, right? And you take this sort of adversarial approach of like, well, why would I intentionally have any friction if there's no reward for that friction?
For
Yep.
sure.
And then what?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So that's, So coming back to this idea of like education for becoming,
Yeah.
I think education has always been for becoming. It's just that we haven't talked about it that much.
Yeah.
Yep.
So people who enter organizations and they, like my parents' generation, for instance, they entered one job and they stayed there forever. Didn't mean they were not learning.
Sure, of course.
We just didn't put labels on it. We
Yeah.
didn't attach degrees to it. We didn't attach course credit and pay money to somebody for it. You're learning a lot along the way, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so the idea that education is for becoming, I think it's a given, right? I mean, that's
yes.
always been the case. I think it's gotten heightened to a certain extent now because things change so fast and
Yep.
you have
Yeah.
to keep up and all of that, right? The other piece that's really interesting in that is a lot of people have talked about this, which is that, that in this world where information is always available, that we don't need the facts. The facts we can
Sure.
always look up.
Yep.
I think that does a discredit to facts
Mhm.
because facts and broader ideas or theories are sort of correlated.
Yep.
A fact, there's a great quote by David Perkins, I think, he says, a fact is a contested claim.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And once you see facts that way, then you realize that it's the lens that you apply to it that makes it a fact.
Right. Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so that tension there. So sometimes when people say that, we can get the facts later, it's like the facts don't make sense unless you have the framework. You cannot develop a framework till you have some facts.
Right.
And so it's that bidirectionality
Sure.
or the transaction nature of that. I think that's critically important.
Yeah.
But otherwise you end up having vacuous ideas which have no possible correlation with reality, which we see a lot of.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Exactly. And so
Right,
I think
right.
that's part of the tension, I think, with AI.
Yes.
Now, if we come to this point where almost all our professions and so on, like AI is taken care of, and
Sure.
I guess we're living under some form of universal basic income and
right.
so on.
Right.
I think there'll be lots of people who will choose not to.
Yeah.
They will not need to go to. I mean, right now we are we are sort of taking for granted that you will spend 12 years
Mhm.
in a little box being taught stuff.
Yeah.
If that's not needed, that's not needed. I mean, there's
Right.
nothing inherent
Yeah.
about school. I mean,
Yep.
when we were in our Paleolithic times, we weren't going to a little box
Yeah.
somewhere and sitting there for 12 years.
Wait,
we were
those
still
cartoons were
Yes.
not
But we're
accurate.
still learning.
Yes.
Right? We're still learning, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be a different kind of learning. And there will be people who will get passionate about music and they will pursue that
Yep.
to the ends of the earth as far as they're concerned. And there'll be others who will be like, yep, I'm just going to sit back and watch TV or whatever, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
right,
whatever
right.
the latest entertainment thing is. So I don't really, there's nothing
Yeah. So
natural
actually,
or essential,
No.
about
Sure.
the systems we have created.
But I don't think this is pushing back, but I'm just thinking through this. So you think about, say, the purpose of an undergraduate degree, just sort of take where we are. And of course, we will argue about that it's sort of trying to sort of create sort of meaning and understanding and that ability to sort of think and learn on your own. But really, a primary part of it is wealth creation. We do it so individuals can create wealth, that they can create wealth for their country. And that's a really big thing.
Right.
And of course, as you say, you take that away. If AI can do that, you've immediately sort of pulled out one of the legs of why we justify this.
Exactly.
But then there is another justification, and it's this idea that there is something powerful, something inherently human about being able to learn and being able to sort of have those sort of frameworks that allow you to learn in different ways.
Yeah.
So I wonder whether we do need to sort of make sure that we don't lose sight of the inherently human attribute to universities and even an undergraduate degree, which is about helping each of us understand how to learn in ways that actually benefit ourselves on our own terms.
And it is an act of meaning making, right?
Right,
It's an act of
yes.
making meaning of I think as I've gotten older, I've become way more pessimistic about the human species,
Right.
And so I might, a younger version of me would have been like, yeah, this is going to free us up for the noble
I like the
pursuit.
way that you gesture at me thinking I'm a younger version of you.
Right? No, because in this matter you are, because I don't know. I think that we might, if we have this universal basic income, we might just keep bickering with each other and we do the Hatfield and McCoy thing and be forming little feuds with each other about no reason at all.
Right,
Because,
yes,
I saw you looked at me this way or that. I mean, we can build horrible things, right? We can do horrible things to each other. And so, I'm a little less optimistic about that. That said, I do think for those for whom the act of building something out of like crafting something, right?
Yes.
Whether it's a scientific theory or it's a poem or it's a piece of sculpture or it's some multimedia sensory experience, which I think those guys will be absolutely empowered by it, because we have lots of people. I mean, who have artistic talent but are stuck in dead-end jobs.
So then bring that back to that idea of friction. So and I love this. So you imagine in a future where we don't have to learn in order to make a living. We learn because it's part of our building our identity. And you have somebody who's excited about creating something, whether it is music or an artifact or something. From everything we've said, you could do that without friction. You could do it the easy way, and you could end up with very, very mediocre art. Or you can push against the friction and learn how to get better and create something that is truly transformative. So then the question to me is, will people take the easy route and follow a future of mediocrity, or will they find that friction, or do we need to somehow create that friction?
I think you will have both kinds of people.
I think you have a nice bell curve.
Yeah, right. I think you will have people for whom it's like, oh, I can do this very easily and quickly, and it's done. And then you'll have others who will engage, and that's where when I said like the answer to this conundrum of AI and learning is caring. I didn't mean caring for each other. I meant caring for the discipline.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And when you think about the word discipline, it has
it's inherent in it. Yes.
There's reward and punishment.
There's a lot there in that word. I mean, and so I think, so absolutely, I would say, yes, they will welcome that friction.
Yes.
Because that friction is what is giving the task
That's
meaning.
What they're driving, right?
Right? It's like, I want to get it right, but this system won't let me. So I'm going to figure a way through, do this or do that. Well, that's the powerful thing.
Right, yes.
And I think about that too, right? Is like, this sets up a really fun thought experiment with it, which is, if we have a technologically advanced society to this point where you don't need to go through a compulsory education to be a functional, member of society, right? Then there is this sort of almost, I dare say the word utopian, this like thought of like, well, yes, schooling and universities and organizations of learning are there to nurture those who are intrinsically motivated for their discipline, for their craft, or if they are just one of those individuals who have an insatiable curiosity. And then, I'm often just curious, like, what happens then when we remove that? Because the reliance then becomes on whatever this technological underpinning is, right? Because that knowledge is not something that is necessarily passed on. It's not even something that's necessarily reflected upon or in any way makes a deeper imprint than, what was it? I got it. There it is. And so you become in some ways, almost a transmission medium of this knowledge. And then I wonder about then the weakness that sets up from a societal level if something were to happen. Right. So again, I'm always with a foot in each camp of like, what do we gain? Amazing utopia and how wonderful. And then what do we lose?
Yes.
Because where
are the vulnerabilities?
Yeah. I mean, I was just sharing. I was sharing last week on our episode when I was talking with Andrew. I was just in Lisbon when they had that massive power outage.
Exactly.
Right. And so, but again, it brings that all this reliance, doesn't matter which generation my fancy phone is. I couldn't even check into a hotel room because they have no way of
checking.
There's no record of whether, and suddenly all of these conveniences and things that we ascribe as these high tech affordances, and I'm living the high life here, just disappears. And then you're left with nothing.
Yeah.
And I worry about when we talk about it, because it's easy to get excited. You can hear the three of us getting all excited about, because this is what we probably all would have continued. And if rewind the clock, or if there's a version of us in this future, we all probably would have ended up at this table anyway. We don't have free will anyway, a different conversation. But I wonder then too about what does that set up in terms of a society that is, one, extremely vulnerable for some sort of disruption. Or two is when you have, I would say, bad actors who are and not bad actors like a terrorist act. I'm talking about a corporate entity that has, of course,
you can manipulate the system,
especially as the chaos and as these things are confusing. Being able to be in there from the onset, like we have examples of now, of just putting their thumb on the scale, to the point at which we no longer are even aware that there's someone pressing on the scale.
Yep.
Oh, and I think it's happening right now.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah.
absolutely honest, right?
I was trying to be gentle about that.
Yeah.
You know.
So, lots of thoughts coming out of that. So one piece that sort of strikes me, let me start with this one first. Moment we have like these incredibly complex systems, you automatically increase vulnerabilities and you increase the potential of chaotic phenomena, right?
Yep, exactly.
Where a butterfly flaps its wings here and Madrid loses power. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Right? I mean, things like that, which post hoc you can trace back cause and effect.
Right. But at the time you can't.
You can't predict this is what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So those kinds of chaotic effects rippling through the system for sure, right? That's something we have to be thoughtful about. I think the other piece that's really important to understand is vast swaths of people do not have access to any of this.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Like they don't have
100%.
access to drinking water half the time.
Stable power. I
Yeah.
mean,
They don't have access to water. They don't have access to toilets. We are seeing with climate change, we're going to see a lot more immigrants, refugees having to leave their climate, Bangladesh, who knows what Bangladesh is going to be. That's millions of people.
Right.
1 inch of, rise of the oceans can be devastating.
Yep.
So, that it is so differentially distributed that the effects of many of these things are going to be felt on people that we will never, ever even come to know.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Partly because there are people with the thumb on the scale not wanting us to know.
Sure.
Partly because we don't want to know.
Yep.
Because there is...
It's cognitively easier
It's
if you know you're not causing harm, right?
Yeah,
or you
right?
don't know of any
Because-
harm you're causing, maybe is a better way of saying that.
And how much our carbon footprint is as individuals. So there's so many factors here that just complicate this up in ways that, it's very easy to think, I think utopian, everybody has X.
Yeah.
Right now, we haven't been able to give drinking water to the entire globe.
Yeah. It's always unevenly distributed.
Exactly.
Yes.
And horribly unevenly distributed. It's not even
that's
gracefully
that's
sort
the
of,
issue, right.
that people have a decent life and, there are other
Yes,
people who are stinking, who are living in their mansions. No, it is distorted beyond measure.
Yep.
And then we are throwing this technology in there, which is again going to split that most probably even further apart.
Right.
Because it now has the power to persuade, to to dissemble, to make you vote against your best intentions,
Right.
best interests. All of that stuff happens, right?
Yep.
And now you have a really powerful tool in the hands of a few men.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other fun part.
Right.
Right? I mean,
Oh.
it's like you can count on your fingertips. It's 6 men or 7 men who have the same background, who never took a humanities class if they could get away with it.
Most of them never finished their degrees.
You know what I mean? Like,
right?
and we're
Right,
talking
I know.
about the value of an undergraduate education.
Right, yes, yes.
For these people, that has
We're actually
zero
seeing
value.
it play out.
Yeah.
Right? You're seeing, so I think those are like very critical questions
Yeah.
to be thinking
Yeah.
about. And that idea of the sort of inevitability of this technological thing and so on, I really like, that's where I think universities become so powerful.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's where we can say, what if, come on, maybe it's not that simple. We can ask these
Look
questions.
beyond.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was recently on a panel. This is last year. I was on a panel in Washington, D.C. for something. And it suddenly struck me that something that I've sometimes taken as being a negative of being an academic, that we engage in whataboutism.
Yes.
Or on the other hand,
Yes.
We're all guilty of whataboutism.
No, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, but what about this? Yes.
Yeah, what about this? And then
Have you
on the
thought of
other
this?
hand,
Yeah.
on the third hand, on the fourth hand. But it hit me that actually is an amazing superpower that we have.
Yeah.
Because I was in a panel with one person who was a representative of the industry. They have no choice but
to just
have their talking
party
points.
line
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah.
We had
whatever.
another person who was, I was the only person there
Yep.
who could be like, yeah, I get what you're saying. Those parts are right.
But
Yeah,
what about this?
What about this?
But effectively, what we become within the university, within academia, is a societal flywheel. So we are the regulators that no matter how crazy things come outside, we have the momentum to allow people to sort of be a little bit more reflexive.
Absolutely.
And think, well, what if we do this? What if that happens?
What
So
are the implications of this? or that?
That's right.
Yeah.
So we slow down the excesses of running so fast that we have no idea where we're going.
I completely agree. And
Yes.
that's one that, in fact, when I was teaching my transdisciplinary seminar, I came back, this is the first year PhD students. this is what I told them. I said,
Right.
this is a superpower.
Yes.
Lean into it.
Yes. Yeah.
Instead of being defensive about it.
Yes.
Because we sometimes get
Yep.
defensive. Like, you
Yep.
academics, you live in the ivory tower, you always have like on the other hand kind of stuff. And I'm like, somebody's got to do that.
Right,
Yeah.
right. But now we're embracing the friction. And again, the discipline.
Yeah.
It's the discipline
Yeah.
of asking what if and accepting and embracing the hard questions
Yes.
rather than looking for the easy solution.
Exactly.
Yes.
And being okay with ambiguity
Yes,
and being
yes,
okay
yeah,
with like,
yeah.
we don't know.
Yep.
And what is it like?
But I was going to say, but that also for me is one of these, hot button, hot topic pieces too, which is, seeing the erosion of exactly that and the support of that, right? So, I mean, across multiple factions, right? Removing funding, removing this, but also even before some of the more recent challenges, I mean, even just, as we've talked at length at different times and spaces around, even with, if you look narrowly at artificial intelligence and how much of the innovation and development of that moved out of higher education systems, right? And into, Google's DeepMind and OpenAI and these places that are, in some cases, these are privately held corporations that are doing the bulk of that research, that the power of that flywheel is being sort of like there's an end run around it.
Yes.
Like, let's skip that because that flywheel.
They see it as an impediment. They don't understand the
sure.
importance of it.
And especially for short, I mean, again, when the model, and this is where I'll start to get kind of animated, so I'm gonna do my best to stay in my chair. But when the short path from research to, a product to profit. And in the middle of that is this gigantic flywheel that has what about this? And the answer to one of those what abouts is something negative, catastrophic, or anything that would in any way impede your pathway to profit.
Progress.
Yeah.
Yes.
What's your natural response is, well, forget that. I'm not going to go through there. I'm going to go around it.
So I've got to link this back to an earlier part of the conversation because this is really resonating with me. And it's the question that you rose about cheating.
Yeah.
So yes, we are, not we, but people are obsessed about AI and how it allows those shortcuts in learning or education. But actually what we're seeing is a whole world which is embracing that.
Yeah.
They're looking for the shortcuts. They're looking for the cheats to get to where they want to be without the friction, without the barriers, without the inconvenience of people asking, what if?
Yeah. I
have this interesting take on cheating.
Yeah.
So two things. One, in AI, we often talk about the alignment problem, right?
Yeah.
So you have, I want AI to make me happy, and it decides to put a wire in my head and give me dopamine shots.
Or just kills you because
no, I didn't mean it.
Bring it on.
Yes. Yeah, not that way. I didn't mean happy. I didn't want happiness.
Just remove all of your wants, therefore you're happy.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's one. So
yes.
So the alignment, and I think what AI is revealing is the alignment problem in education.
Yes.
Where we have taken writing a 5-paragraph essay as to be a proxy for what's happening, how you think.
Yeah.
Yes.
And what AI has done is driven a wedge through that and said, guys, maybe not so much.
Yeah, you don't need that.
So part of the challenge for us as educators is to then start thinking of better performances of understanding.
Yes.
So that's one piece.
Yep.
But there's a deeper piece to this, I think, and that comes back to the idea of caring. And this is something I didn't talk about ever till like maybe 3 months ago. But now I talk about it a lot. I mean, at least a few times I've talked about it publicly. And that has to do with when did I cheat? Right? And that's when I was in my undergraduate in engineering. I was an 18-year-old who was writing limericks about special theory of relativity. Right? I was interested in the arts, I was in the science, I was in math. That's who I was.
Yeah.
4 years of being beat down by exam after exam, not caring about understanding, not caring about learning, nothing personalized for me. I also knew the embarrassment this would be to my parents if I left my undergraduate degree and left, and I needed to just basically and so
finish.
I cheated. Am I proud of it? Absolutely not. Once I left that and I went into design school and then a grad school, and now do I cheat now? Absolutely not.
Right.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I think
the difference being between the two.
The difference between the two being that I care about this. I didn't give a shit about
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right? Or it was a system that was just bound to just churn people through the thing without caring for them.
Yes.
And so large part of the cheating, so one part of the cheating is that alignment problem issue that we can fix.
Yes.
The deeper problem though is that we have created systems where students don't care.
Yeah.
And it's not their fault.
And I would put a third on that. So this is where I find the cheating question so interesting because it is complex. It is not black and white. But to me, the third one is where we back students into a corner. So even if they had this predisposition to care, we rob them of that ability. And we basically tell them, you have to do this within an impossible timeline with a load of other stuff. And they see no other way forward other than to take shortcuts.
Because it would be very interesting to see, right? Like the number of people who end up, cheating or taking the shortcut, right? How many of that is they start off, I would guess very few students enter their first day of school and they're like, I'm going to cheat my way through this. Yeah. But it is essentially in many ways, like it is a health care in the holistic sense, right? Too much stress, not enough time, too much distraction, all these things that are
requirements that don't
requirements
make
that
any
make
sense.
sense.
The busy work. Yes.
It doesn't make any sense.
Can I just say APA formatting here?
Yeah, there you go.
Right. You are on a crusade against
No. So here is a fact that I'm actually quasi proud of. I still can't do APA. And I've been an academic for 30 years.
I had no idea what APA was until I came to the States.
Well, Punya, as someone who's written and published with you, I know.
Yeah. And I think I'm doing it right. And then people are like, what? I was like, I just made that up.
Nope, I changed it for you.
Who cares? It's the wrong metric. It's the wrong framework.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes.
And we still do that, right?
Yes.
I mean, so much of school, particularly K-12, and maybe first couple of years of undergraduate, are trust us, this will be good for you.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I think there are some kids who are willing to trust you. There are some who give you a chance for a year or two, then they're like, I don't think so.
Right.
And there are some who are distrustful, and maybe they're the smartest of the lot. Right. But we don't give them a chance.
We don't. So I've got to bring a flip in here.
Okay.
Again on cheating. So one of the best things I heard about cheating was from a student in one of my classes where we were talking about AI and cheating, and he put his hand up and he said, if you're not cheating, you're not trying hard enough. And I loved it because it's a different perspective of it because he was actually looking at the friction. So to him, the friction was the system. And he was using that friction to find creative ways around it. So he was actually engaging his imagination and his creativity and his desire to get to a certain point. So he saw, and I fully agree with him. You can imagine if you're trying to break the system because the system doesn't care, this is actually a good thing.
Because you're seeing this as, I need to get through this and get that piece of paper
that
has my degree on it.
There's a degree of creativity and ingenuity to come up with a way. It's not you learned a lot. It wasn't what I wanted you to learn, but you learned how to go all the way around.
But who were you to decide what I needed to learn anyway?
That's exactly. But it's very different from the sort of cheating where you're put in a corner and you just sort of have to do something. This is the sort of cheating where you recognize that actually the system isn't everything it's cracked up to be, and you find another way around it. Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean, I agree. The cheating thing, I think it comes in cycles, right?
Sure.
Wikipedia came along, and this.
Everything is. I was an undergrad when Google. It was like, oh no! Now all the homework assignments, everyone just Googles the homework assignment. Is like, oh, the answer is 32. There we go, because that was the easy thing to look up.
The thing is, that's why you show your work. Right. Now AI will do that, but then we'll figure something. I mean, so that part that as educators who care about that friction of learning and so on, we will find ways through it.
Yes. Yeah.
We will figure that out. We will figure out ways to get at what you're thinking through these different performances of understanding.
Right. Yes.
So that doesn't worry me. It's the other bigger discourse and what this AI stuff is going to be socially and politically and so on. That's what I think is we should be really worried about.
Yeah. And actually, can I just bring that back to your quadrant? So this is something else that's been sort of going around my brain since we've been working. I love quadrants and quadrant models because it allows you to ask, well, what causes you to slip from one quadrant to another? And sort of in this sort of broader context of AI in society, I'm thinking about those people who are expert in their domain and expert in AI. So they're the top right-hand quadrant. But as you said, this creates an additional cognitive load for them. And so there you've got friction in a bad way, friction which is going to sort of try and pull them out of that cognitive load and potentially move them from that quadrant to another one. So imagine moving them to a quadrant where actually they begin to lose expertise because it's easier for them just to absorb everything they're being given.
For sure.
And that actually worries me a lot, that we end up, even smart people end up trusting AI because they're just overwhelmed with everything that they're exposed to.
And I think this deep research, which turn out 30-page manuscripts at the.
I use it every day.
I know. Same.
And I actually wanted to ask you about that because I have been very anxious about exactly that.
Yes. Yep.
That issue that you raised around deep research. Because if it's throwing a paragraph at me, I can carefully scan that paragraph and be like, oh, I don't like the nuance here. I can tweak that language.
Now when it's 96 pages and beautifully well written.
Yeah, I think it's a really important question.
So I worry about that a lot, which is why I have sort of really hesitated using it.
Yeah.
And I can't verify.
I share that same issue because what happens, like from my own perspective, when I'm evaluating it, right, I can feel the slip, and that slip for me is that you're reading it, you're like, all right, first paragraph, good. First page, third page, fifth page, 10th page, good. 12th page. I haven't seen anything yet that concerns me, so it's then scroll 32nd page, so I feel that slip, and I get done reviewing a document. And I go, yeah, that was really good. But then that little voice is like, but you didn't read every word. And then I'm like, I didn't read every word. But you can feel, even while I'm reviewing, because, sometimes these things I'll ask it to do. I mean, it'll, like, I think the biggest one I've got was like a 96 page something or other. Yep. And you read it, and every part that you're sampling is right on. It's good.
Okay. Yeah. But you don't know what's missing.
You don't know what's missing.
So I struggle with this. I actually really like it. And I like it because I can produce a long document. And if I simply use it as a way of organizing my thinking and stimulating my thinking, I can see fairly quickly if it's an area that I'm somewhat familiar with, where it's completely off base or where it's sort of resonating. But I use it to augment my thinking. Right. So that feels fairly comfortable to me. But I'll give you an example of where it fails. And it's what it doesn't cover. So I've just been through a process where I had to produce a long document looking at a speculative history of artificial intelligence in society. And it was great. It was fabulous. But then in a conversation with another person, I suddenly realized there was a really important part of this puzzle that was completely missed by the AI. And it was that one conversation with somebody who knew something that the AI didn't, that in this case, it allowed me to extend my thinking. But you can imagine if you just solely relied on that document rather than using it as a catalyst, you would miss that.
Yeah. I mean, I've done this where I was trying to come up with like a outline for a book, right? And Claude and I were going back and forth at it. And it was super exciting while I was doing it, like outlines and chapters and blah, blah, blah. Left it aside, came back to it a few days later. And I was like, wow, we just went down a rabbit hole because Claude, like anything I would suggest, Claude would just agree. And
right,
go.
yes, yep.
And I was like, dang.
Yep.
Like I didn't even realize that's what had happened.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And that's a domain that I know well.
It's intellectual
and then
ossification. Yes, it begins to sort of depress your critical thinking.
Yes. And that's what I worry about, like those groups which are,
Well, and again, this feeds one of my concerns that I think is increasing is just this recursive ability. So these happens, that gets published. It's like, right. So in the field of these things, that happens. It's sort of agrees with you, kind of steers you in a direction that maybe not intentional, but doesn't matter. That then gets published, goes back into the system. So it starts reinforcing. So you have this sort of recursive learning cycle because that's how these things work. They gobble up anything new. And, people have said before, this is where you get into this dangers of like the AI slop, which is where, where these tools, whether they're working mostly in isolation or with a human counterpart, are producing something that then, so you start to slowly walk away from that purely human created new fresh content, new ideas, new generation. And you end up just in this, confinement of this recursive nightmare of where everything new is based on recycled stuff, which you start to just lose that thread from where the original piece came from. And there's some interesting examples now of that, of just how, bad OCR scans have introduced like these word combinations that were meaningless,
Right.
but it thought they were a word. And so that's showing up in people's outputs in papers and stuff because it's pulling from these, like, I think they were medical journals or something. And it was like the fold and the spine, right? And the OCR jumped from, right column.
And it's now become a thing.
Yeah. And so, now you can scan for it.
And they can trace it back to this one article.
Yeah. And it was like one journal or something was just the way it was scanned. Yeah. But once it's in there and when it's in the blob, right? Mm-hmm. How do you extract that? Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's even a technical way to do that, right? But
I recently spoke at this journalists convention. And I said, your job is going to become so much harder.
Yep.
And you spend a significant amount of time verifying information. Mm-hmm. It's just going to get infinitely harder.
I know.
It's so difficult to tell.
Like how would you, right? Unless you talk to the person. That's the only way that you can trust.
But the reality is this is the way the world's going. It's one thing to say this is dreadful. Think about all of the unintended consequences. But the reality is the trainers left the station.
Yeah, for sure. And there are going to be lots of positives to it too. Don't get me wrong, right?
Yes,
but that's where we come in with the on the other hand.
No, and I think that is such an important point.
On the other hand.
No. But you think about this idea of the flywheel of universities and academia. So yes, the trainers left the station, but we still have some choices about how fast it goes, which direction it goes in, how we nudge it. And if we don't have those institutions and those people who are asking the critical questions about, do we really want to go this way? Do we really want to go this fast? Who's gonna stop the train before it hits a barrier?
Even if I'm a little less optimistic than you on this. We have clearly
I have my pessimistic days. Yes.
No, in the sense that how much control we have about this train and where it's going and stuff. But even if we don't have, what we do have is at least agency within ourselves, and providing those kinds of thinking, ways of approaching and thinking to our students, so that they become smarter and better about their thinking about this technology and the kinds of choices they make and so on and so forth, right? So to me, that's the critical thing.
And so on that, and we should probably wrap up at some point. We could go on forever, but I did want to go back to the course that you've just finished teaching, because we mentioned it, but we didn't really go into it in too much depth. But it seems like this is something you're doing. You're not avoiding AI with your students, but by hands-on experience, you're giving them a way of understanding how to actually use it and incorporate it into their lives or not, depending on the value that it brings and their understanding of how to actually be themselves and really sort of achieve what they want to achieve with it.
For sure. I mean, so this was somebody asked me right on the first day of class, what are your policy about using AI? I said, I don't care. Use whatever you want.
Yeah.
So, but there are a couple of rules there. You will never claim AI output as being your output.
Yep.
Right? Second, if you claim something to be that authentically you might have used AI in creating it. You have to be able to stand behind every word. You cannot say, oh, sorry, that was something. No.
Yes.
If you have submitted it under your name, saying that AI helped me do it, it's yours. Yep. You have to be able to stand behind it. But beyond that, we had no rules. It's like, this is it. Yeah. This is the world we are. This is our playground. And so we made sure that the final event that we had one booth on AI myths to make sure that we are talking about some of the problems that these large language models have, or image generation and so on and so forth. But at the same time, that it really empowered a whole bunch of students to create different kinds of bots, to think about what it means. And you can see the reflections and so on. I mean, it was a pretty transformative sort of course for them, and driven always by those four sort of Dewey's impulses, right?
Yeah.
Inquiry, communication, construction, and expression, right? So every bot they made, so there's this student who likes Indian percussion, tabla. And so she made one called Talviz. How do you visualize rhythm?
Right.
And somebody's interested in journalism or so on. Okay, how do we, so they're bringing their whole selves to that process.
Right.
But what's the point of saying we can't use X or Y?
Right, and this is what I loved about it. I'm going through sort of seeing those final products from the students. You had this sense that it was a playground. They were given license to play and experiment and bring their own sense of what they wanted to achieve to it. But I also got the sense in doing that, they actually learned in themselves intuitively far more about how to use AI and use it responsibly and wisely than they ever would have done just listening to somebody tell them about how to do this.
Plus, that's very boring.
I know.
I would have what I'd call improv, like the Sunday before class. So class is to meet on Monday. Everything would be all set, and suddenly something would strike my fancy. So I
throw it all away.
No. So I would have this one section which was like Punya's random musings.
Okay, yes.
And I never knew what it was going to be that week.
Yep.
But every time I would have something, silly or
pop
goofy
up.
pop up in my head, and we'd
Yep.
share. So that would be like the only lecture, really.
Mhm.
Beyond that, it was completely driven by them. They would design the activities that they would do every week
Yes.
around the topics that we had. So we actually had 2 books that we read.
Mhm.
The Sparks of Genius, and then the book of edited essays that we've been writing for Tech Trends
Mhm.
around transdisciplinary skills and creativity. So there was that grounding in
Right,
that for the
yes.
first half
Sure.
of the semester.
Yep.
And then the second half, we switched to becoming an organization, which
Yes.
was kind of interesting.
Yep.
Yeah.
See the students step up. I mean, people became project managers.
Because they decided what they wanted to do together,
Yes.
didn't they?
Yeah.
And that's what's so powerful, seeing the culmination of that in the event was, I mean, I think that was something that's so powerful. And Punya, maybe just kind of like as a, I don't know, words of wisdom or advice to other educators, right? From your perspective, because that also takes from what you did in terms of organizing and constructing this course, takes a lot of, well, I'll even say it's a brave thing to do as an educator to let go of that control.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that is a very difficult thing when dealing with, professional educators who have been trained, and they are from the start to the finish, they are in full control of everything that happens. To relinquish that, we've been talking about this for a long time in ed tech, especially around coding, of transitioning from the sage on the stage to the guide on the side, and all these kind of pithy sayings. But always the friction there is releasing control, being okay with I don't know what's going to happen. So I'm just curious from your side as the educator who designed and orchestrated this thing, what advice or, words that you would share with other educators around doing that exact thing of being okay letting go of that control?
Yeah. So I think first of all is recognizing the myth of control.
Sure.
You think that you have control.
You think you're in control.
Actually, you don't.
Yeah.
So there's this great story. I don't remember the name of the professor. He was teaching a signals processing class in Urbana-Champaign. And he actually went back to students 5 years after they graduated. What do you remember from this class?
Oh, interesting.
Right? I mean, think about the number of classes you have taken.
Yeah.
How much of what do you remember out of that, right? And so what he decided was he figured out like the 3 big ideas that students should take away from his class. The world is analog. We take slices of that world, that makes it digital, right? And then we can now do transformations on it, mathematical transformations on those things like Fourier transforms and so on.
Yep.
And then we can pump it back out in analog.
You mean modulate and demodulate those signals?
Thank you. Yes. Yep. There you go. Coming full circle.
That's right.
I love it. And he said and so what he would do in class, he would start always at the semester. These are the key ideas, and here are the technical details.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. But bounce back again. Big idea, technical details, bounce back.
Yep.
And that's how because what we don't give students often is this big framing or an idea why the stuff is important.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just the trust us.
It's the trust.
Why do I have to learn this? Just you'll need it. Trust me.
us, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that aspect of sort of thinking about what are the big ideas that you want students to take away and hitting them all the time, right?
Yes.
Coming back to them over and over again. So I did this with a high school biology teacher. So he had this thing, the Francis Crick's, what is that? The golden whatever of biology that, DNA makes RNA, RNA makes protein make us.
Yeah.
And so he would make these posters of a butterfly on this person's hand, and it would be DNA makes RNA.
Okay.
Now,
Yes.
us,
Yep.
which is us, the butterfly and the hand. That's both us.
Right.
And so he would have this, and he framed his entire year around that idea.
Okay. Yes. Yep.
Right. And now 5 years from now, you might forget the detail of mRNA.
But you remember the big picture.
You remember the big picture.
Yeah.
And now you
Why
can
it
go
matters.
back to the domain and you can read it and it's like, oh, now I understand AGTC and so on and so forth. So that's one. The big ideas, nail that down. Be very clear in your mind what they are, and you've got to keep repeating them over and over again.
Yep.
The other thing I really, really care about, this is a great quote by Lee Schulman, and I'm going to mangle it, so it's on my website. You can look it up. But basically says that learning is great when it's public and communal. So I lean into radical transparency in my classes. So every reflection that the students did was public to everyone.
Okay.
It didn't mean that they all had to go read it.
Sure. But it was available.
It was available.
Yep.
And that
Yep.
act itself, that I'm writing something that others in my class would read, puts pressure on you.
Right. Yes.
The groups would write were designated to write a blog post, which would go publicly on my website under their name.
Mm-hmm.
So people are going to read it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so that again puts pressure. That event at the end, completely public.
Yep.
And I said, we could crash and burn here.
Right. Right.
And that's okay.
And that's
there's the friction. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's okay.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
And so I think that radical public, I think too much of our learning is in a box somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. Most probably even without windows, which is like a terrible metaphor. Right. And here we were in a lab which was completely open.
Yeah.
People would be coming by. There was a Singapore delegation started taking pictures of us, because somebody told them it's a class. They're like, oh, class.
Oh, cool.
Like,
Yes.
Great. Right. It's out in the open.
Yep.
The people who would be sitting there who would come to the lab to work would come to me later and say, like, what are you guys doing here?
Mm-hmm.
Say, it's a class. Like, really? What class is this? Right?
Yep.
And so that radical transparency is something I really, really believe in.
Yeah.
Like, there are certain things, obviously, we need to keep private. I get that. But we often lean so much.
Yeah. No, if the default is public and then you begin to modulate from there.
Modulate,
yes.
right?
Yep.
And so I think that, and I think finally Dewey's, those four things, that it always, anything people do in my class has to be instantiated in some kind of an artifact.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
That you can share with others.
Yep.
So it might be a poster, it might be a photograph, it might be a poem, it might be whatever.
That's something, yes.
Something has to be created out of it that we can point to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. And so it's construction, communication, expression, and inquiry. So
Yeah.
all four things. So I think those are the things that I think can apply across courses.
Right.
There are certain privileges I have teaching a master's or a doctoral seminar.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Teaching a class about creativity.
Right.
I could give lectures on that. That would sort of defeat the point.
Yeah.
But I do think that big ideas, transparency in so far
yes.
as possible, and focusing on building your, expressing your understanding through some kind of a thing.
Yes. Yep.
I think those can cut across.
I
disciplines.
love that. And just listening to that, the thing that really stands out with the rest of the conversation is that none of those are AI specific.
Exactly.
Those are the fundamentals of learning and teaching. Then AI just comes in as yet another
It's one more resource.
Yes.
We can watch
another tool.
YouTube clip. We can watch a movie. It's fine. I mean, you do the whole movies and that's perfectly fine. Right. And so I think to me, that's where the sort of the way this works is where AI it's not even an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Plagiarism is not an issue.
Yep.
With true learning, it's not at all,
Right.
because it's not about that. Yeah. It's about how you're using that to make your artifact, do your thing. How you create that element.
There's so much pleasure that comes from that.
Yes.
From that engagement with AI. I don't know if you guys got a chance to see this. I do these typographical designs.
Mm-hmm.
Then Claude and
I saw that.
Claude and I go back and forth and to come up with some sort of concrete poetry or something. Some of those are amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been one of the most fun creative exercises I've engaged in a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And there's genuine pleasure. I mean, I've written about it in the blog that there is genuine pleasure in that interaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm building something that those words, we go back and forth a lot because it'll give me garbage. And I'm like, this is so cliche. Try something different.
Right.
So it'll say something. I said, no, go completely off. I said, make it a Zen koan. Like make it a Zen koan about pizza, about some typographical design.
Right.
And we go back and forth, but it comes up with things sometimes that blow me away. There are some designs where it's like, wow, it was perfect for that. And I love that interaction.
Yep.
So I'm not averse to AI or anything, but thinking about what role it can play in that space, I think becomes critical.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Great
Wonderful.
place to end.
We can end there. Punya, thank you so much for
this is long overdue. So
yes.
Thank you. I
know. We'll make sure it will not be 30 episodes before you're back.
That's okay.
For sure.
Yeah. No, thank you. This was great fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, of course, thank you as always.
Thank you, Sean.
Yes, and I will do my best to stuff as much
including Punya's blog because
Punya Mishra.com.
don't broadcast that as much as it needs to be broadcast.
I agree.
That's right.
Yes.
It is you'll be warned. You'll love it or get lost in it. And it goes back like 18 years.
Yeah.
So
17, 18 years.
Yeah, lots of great things in there. But that's your primary place where you post all your thoughts, right?
anything this comes back
Yeah.
to that transparency business, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Everything
Everything
you do
I do is out there publicly.
Is there a simple URL that you could give
It's
now?
just my name.com,
Punya Mishra?
punyamishra.com.
Yeah,
PunyaMishra.com.
PunyaMishra.com. Just literally Google search Punya Mishra or put it in, ask your Perplexity, ask your ChatGPT. It'll tell you, it'll point you there.
Don't ask Claude because it'll say, I have no idea who this is.
This guy who keeps trying to steal my poems about whatever.
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So this is, you can edit this one out, but I had done this experiment with ChatGPT when the image thing had come out,
Yeah.
where I took a photograph of this eclipse ground, right?
Yes.
And I
Oh,
gave
yeah.
it to
remember
it,
you.
and
Yes.
back and forth a little bit, it finally figured out when it was. So I said, like, these O3 reasoning models have come. Let me try it with that.
Mhm.
This time, first pass, it said it's photograph taken during an eclipse of the ground, blah, blah, blah.
Yep.
And I said, it was taken in the 1990s. Where was this taken?
Mhm.
Right? And so it gave me 4 eclipses, total eclipses that had happened across the world,
Huh.
and said, I can't specify where. Can you give me more information?
Mhm.
I said, I took this photograph and my name is Punya Mishra. It said this photograph was taken most probably when you were a grad student in Afghanistan.
And here's your
knows
address,
you.
and here's where here's your
And I
credit
was
score.
like, okay. But to be fair, then I gave it that optical illusion, fake optical illusion with a massive red circle and a tiny red circle. Guess what? Both circles are the same size. I'm like, okay.
Okay, we've got work to do. Oh.
No, we are good.
Yeah, very good, fantastic. Well, thank you, Punya.
Thank you guys so
and again,
much.
we'll do this again real soon.
Yes,
Great.
thank you.
All
This
right,
was
well-
fun. Now, I do want to come back and talk a little bit about this whole work I've been doing, which we didn't touch on at all. The whole anthropomorphization
Oh, yeah.
thing.
Yes.
Yes.
And that, to me, those are the real dangers coming down the road.
We'll
we
have you
focus-
back.
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really do want to talk about
All
it.
right,
because I
so-
don't think it's getting the attention it deserves.
Fantastic. So until next time when Punya is back to talk about anthropomorphization, we'll be there. So thank you for joining us on Modem Futura.
Demodulating signal.
Modem Futura is a production of the Future of Being Human initiative at Arizona State University. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows. To learn more about the Future of Being Human initiative and all of our other projects, please visit us on the web at futureofbeinghuman.asu.edu.
End transmission.